So this is a screencast for the PowerPoint, Chapter 1, The Nature of Theater. And what I'd like to do is kind of go through the PowerPoint with you and point out some of the highlights in each slide. First of all, let's look here at the origins of ritual practices. We know from reading the text that this concept of ritual is really at the heart of theater as we know it today. But fundamentally, we think back to ritual, and it predates history. We know from very early on that humans have an innate need to ritualize their lives. I'd invite you to think about some of the rituals in your everyday life, be it your morning ablutions, what you have at meals, the route you travel when you go back and forth to work or to school. Now, theater is a ritual, at least in the context of our study. We're looking at ancient Greek theater. So as a formalized, ritualized, structured sort of a pastime, it dates back more than 2,500 years to ancient Greece. And we know that theater and ritual have been part of cultures throughout the world. And interestingly, as we look through especially the part 2, which is the history of theater, to see how theater has evolved independently, although having fundamentally similar ideas and structures in various parts of the world. Okay, second slide. The role and function of theater in society has fluctuated over time. That's sort of a statement of fact. Some of the examples noted in our textbook is that early on, theater functioned as a religious activity. It was a formalized expression of religious belief, religious practice. Theater has from time to time and continues to also be a traveling performance, not always a fixed performance venue for a theater company. Rather, a company would travel from place to place to present a theatrical experience to a wider audience. And generally, as a rule, theater functions as a form of entertainment, but there are other functions of theater as well. This slide asks us to consider the value and respectability of theater. Again, thinking about theater on the whole arc of cultural and political and social experience, theater has been forbidden and banned because it was considered a form of lying. As a matter of fact, Oscar Wilde in the 19th century talked about theater being beautiful lies. But theater is also considered a truthful reflection of human behavior. It's sort of a mirror held up to society. Entertainment forms, be it theater, film, television, any kind of storytelling, is a way of presenting issues within society that ask people to consider those issues without directly confronting someone in the first person. So here's a few questions, and these are for your own edification. Considering the reading you've taken on so far in these few slides, what is the role and function of theater in society today? This would be great for a discussion question. You could throw at each other in the open forum, or maybe have a conversation with somebody else if you're working through this class with a friend. But that's the purpose of this particular slide. Now, as we work through these first few chapters, we're going to be looking at the fundamental structure of theater. So here we go, the basic elements of theater. Think of these elements as a three-legged stool. You have what is performed, the performance, and the audience. For those that like mathematical equations, A performs B for C. There you go. But that's kind of where we stand. And to really have a true theatrical experience, you need all three of these components. Or as with a three-legged stool, it will not stand. So let's look at each leg individually. First of all, what is performed? There are a lot of different things you can consider theatrical performance. And I bet if you challenge yourself, you could run the whole gambit from Italian opera to Broadway musicals, contemporary dramas, historical plays, to organized sporting events and wrestling. All of these things, in one way or another, could be considered theater. So if we think about that, what is the essence of theatrical performance? Well, it's the stage performance of a text. At its simplest, it is storytelling. So what is performed is difficult to truly define. And theater, as a performing art, can be hard to nail down via definition. Key components of the performance will include things like the performance space, the artistic collaboration, and theatrical elements. Performance space would be the place where the performance is occurring. And this could be a street corner, it could be the subway, it could be a formal, fancy performance hall. But each of these different kinds of venues will affect the relationship between the performer and the audience. There's always a sense of collaboration. Theater is not an art form that is created in a vacuum. It is not a sole practice. Generally, there is a playwright, someone who crafts the story, and then different collaborators who contribute to the presentation and molding and shaping of the story for presentation to a wider audience. And ultimately, especially in the 20th century, these other theatrical elements that are the visuals, the eye candy, the trappings of theater, scenery, costumes, music, lighting, etc. All of these different pieces make up a complete theatrical experience. Now the audience, the next leg of the stool. Peter Brook said the only thing that all forms of theater have in common is the need for an audience. And it's true. Without an audience, you've got a lot of actors who are, narcissistic and kind of performing for each other. It's like the garage band that never gets out of the garage. You need that audience to complete that cycle of creation and communication. And there are all these different sort of permutations, right? You've got performer's relationship to the audience relationship to the performance, and audience to audience. Different kinds of venues will contribute to those relationships in different ways. So here's a question. What is art? How is art defined? This is also discussed in the first chapter. Prior to the 18th century, art was considered a systematic application of known principles to achieve some predestined result. Holy cow. And then in the 18th century, you have this age of enlightenment. And the arts were divided up into the concept of useful arts and fine arts. Now, what, may you ask, are those divisions? Well, useful arts are things that can be taught and mastered through specific techniques. And I would like to extend that definition into things that can be quantified, that define or pigeonhole our world. Okay, the sciences, engineering, those sorts of things. Whereas the fine arts are, according to the definition from our textbook, are products of genius that cannot be reduced to rules or principles. And these are the things that don't try to define or quantify our world, but try to explain the unexplainable, to express an understanding of literature, right, and painting and music and dance and all these emotional things. Okay. Next, the text talks about the differentiation between popular culture and elitist culture. I'm not sure if elitist is the best term, but if we consider these things, we can see these divisions now. You know, what kinds of expressions of art would fit into these two major categories? Think about those. More questions for you to consider. And now a conversation about the purpose of art. Art is a means of understanding one's world. As opposed to defining it, it's understanding it. Okay? Like other disciplines such as history, art seeks to discover and record patterns. Right? We look at how we behave as a community. And art tends to not so much be about facts and figures, but about intellect and feelings. Right? Feelings. The concept of willing suspension of disbelief. This is a term that was coined by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And it talks about how people understand that a play is not real, but they allow themselves to fully immerse themselves in the experience. Two aspects of willing suspension of disbelief is the concept of aesthetic distance, which means that in a way you're like a god on Mount Olympus looking down. You have ultimate objectivity, viewing the events of the play. Yet you at the same time have empathy, and you can develop specific feelings for the circumstance or the characters within the story. Some special qualities of theater. Now this list is kind of culled out. It's not as organized in the text, but these are very unique to theater. Theater has a sense of life-likeness. It has a sense of ephemerality. It's ephemeral. It happens once, and even though you have multiple performances, no two performances are the same. A sense of objectivity, which presents both outer and inner experience through speech and action. There's complexity. Theater utilizes a variety of different modalities to create the environments and worlds of the play. It has a sense of immediacy. It has psychological immediacy, and you, as an audience member and as the actors on stage, experience moment by moment what's happening in the story. So, more questions about how you might consider these special qualities, what strengths and weaknesses they may have. Value of art. Now here's the $64 question. It is stated in our text that theater is a humanizing force. It creates a sense of understanding in our community through role-playing and observation. It is also a source of cultural expression, giving understanding to various cultures through their theater. And we'll see this especially in the chapter in Part 2 on diversity. Now, a point that is something to consider in our text is this idea of multiple types of intelligence and how different people respond and absorb and understand things based on different types of learning. Some people are very linguistic or verbal. Some people are logical and mathematical. Other people have a strong musical bent or spatial relationships, which kind of relates to body and kinesthetic learning. There are some that are intrapersonal and interpersonal, but these different kinds of intelligence or modes of learning greatly affect how people experience theater. Now, here's an activity you might take on yourself just to see how you process the information in this chapter.